All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to Conversations with Trudy. This is our third week, and we are excited to welcome all our viewers on Facebook. Today we have with us Reese Antoinette and Brianna Arscott Grant. And as usual, welcome Brianna and Reese. It's a pleasure having you both here today. We usually start with our guests, like telling a little bit about themselves to our Facebook viewers. So can you go ahead and do that? Reese, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I am Reese Antoinette, also Sharice Mullings, same person. A community organizer, activist, community leader, as well as an actress. Currently at NYU grad acting, going into my last year, but prior to being at NYU grad acting, I spent numerous years community organizing, specifically on Staten Island, doing some work around Tompkinsville Park, which is across the street from where Eric Garner died. And also figuring out ways using programming to bridge the gap between the community and the police through Canvas Institute, Island Voice. Also helping to organize youth empowerment summits through Island Voice on Staten Island for many years. I've spent many years figuring out how to bridge the gap between communities, particularly disenfranchised communities, communities of color, Black communities such as the African, Caribbean, African-American communities on Staten Island. But even my work expands outside of Staten Island. I've done voter registration in all 5 boroughs, done youth empowerment events that have to do with fashion and music, collaborated with music industry executives to do that in Manhattan. So youth empowerment, women empowerment, arts, and that's pretty much me.
Awesome. Brianna?
Hi, I'm Brianna. I grew up in New York. I graduated last year from the University of Pennsylvania with a double major in international relations and French, as well as a minor in Africana studies. While I was an undergrad, I worked in the US, France, Spain, China, Hong Kong, and Jordan. I did a lot of different kinds of work, but a lot of the work that I did abroad was working with children. Sometimes it was working with children of immigrants, teaching different topics such as US politics and explaining the racial climate both here and abroad. I've also been very politically involved here in the States. So for example, I was an intern with Senator Robert Casey in Philadelphia. And in addition to that, I also worked with the Clinton campaign, so Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign back in 2016. And my senior year of college, I worked with an initiative started by Vice President Biden. It was a diplomacy initiative, and we worked on diplomatic relations between the US and Japan. So I did a series of talks in the US, mostly focused in Philly as well as DC. And then it culminated in a trip to Japan where I discussed various political issues and topics with different Japanese political leaders. When I returned to the States, I gave a presentation in front of the University of Pennsylvania president, Amy Gutman, as well as Vice President Biden, discussing my experiences with racism and race relations, both in the US and abroad, and comparing the two. Currently, I am a rising second-year law student at Georgetown University Law Center. I am the secretary of our BALSA, and most recently, I led our Black Lives Matter fundraiser on behalf of the Georgetown BALSA that culminated this past Sunday, and we raised a total of a little bit over $21,450 in 1 week.
Awesome. Wow. Both well-rounded. All right, so we're going to start by talking about, first of all, racism has been a huge issue in this country for many, many years. We've had over 400 years of slavery. It's been over 150 years since racism was officially abolished, and about 55 years since Martin Luther King's walk and we're still experiencing racism in America, and we're also still experiencing segregation. Now, I know both of you have had your personal experiences with racism. For you, Brianna, you've had experience both here and abroad. Is that in Jordan or?
The experiences with racism, or the most prominent experiences that I would think of abroad, were in France and China. China, just in terms of being a Black woman in China, I was touched a lot. I was spit at. I was followed. There were a series of precautions that I had to take. So I was working there through Harvard University and the University of Hong Kong. And it got so bad that the program leader didn't even want me to go out by myself because they were scared of what would happen. I was encircled one day in broad daylight at a bank and not allowed to move for a while. So just things like that. And then France, my experience there, I studied abroad for a semester. And while there, I had a just frankly extremely racist experience. I did a homestay program, and I ended up moving a total of 5 times within the first 2 months, maybe even the first 5 weeks I was there, because of hosting things like, we tried to help you all would be better off if you were still enslaved. Just very racially charged topics. And the second host, who thought that all Black people steal. So she would follow me around and accuse me of any little thing that was off in her home. And unfortunately, even having to justify that what I was experiencing was indeed racism and that it wasn't acceptable to the program that I was studying through, which was Columbia University, in partnership with my own university.
Wow, that's crazy. That's a lot. Cherise, would you like to talk to us about your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it is systemic, it is institutional, it is on a daily basis here in America. I mean, it's in our television, it's in people not understanding my hair, it's in colorism within our own community, it's in the NYPD, it's within understanding that there are lines in communities that you cannot cross. I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood, growing up in Long Island, for example, when I was in high school, Long Island is extremely segregated. You have redlining that's in this country. This is embedded in American society in a way that what we're doing right now is uncovering a lot of dead bodies, a lot of dirt, a lot of skeletons in our closet for this country that have always been there. And for me, we're walking around with these ghosts. I mean, if you're Black in America, racism is an everyday experience because you're conscious of the color of your skin. And you're conscious about when you walk into a certain store, you walk into a certain neighborhood, how you appear, what could be the perception of your presence.
Mm-hmm.
You're in the classroom, if you're in a school, that's also something you think about. Is this institution prepared to support my perspective, where I come from and who I am? Do they even know who I am? Have they taken the time to learn that? And so these are all questions that Black people have to ask on a daily level, and even as you start to do the school level. I mean, we're both students. It's like on an institutional level, it's wild. Can you imagine an elementary school student? I don't think this country has done enough work to actually educate our teachers to be able to deal with Black students and some of the things that we're going through right now. And I mean, I really feel for the next generation, because we need more educators to be able to support Black students in the classroom at an earlier age so that they don't feel like they're the other. And I'm grateful because there are tons of books. I mean, my nieces have children's books with, characters that look like them. And then start. I mean, that's an amazing beginning, but that's not where the conversation can end. And I feel like as an American, I feel very much aware at all times about my body, my gender as a Black woman, and how that is perceived and how that is received in space.
Great. So we've seen a lot of unrest and protests in the past few weeks because of the senseless murder of George Floyd. It has ignited an explosive reaction all over the world from our allies alike and from the African-American community. The protests we're seeing today are not just because of the George Floyd murder. It's because of many others who have been murdered before him. And it's because of the racial injustice for years, police brutality against Black people, mainly, especially Black men in particular. And we now have a president in office who facilitates the perpetuation of racism and abuse against Black people. And I feel like Black people are now fed up. And finally, there are people, even some white people are coming on board. So for both of you, I need to know, because I know, Reese, you've been in the protests. Brianna, I'm not sure if you've been a part of any protest. You have been. What inspired both of you to become activists? Let's start with you, Reese, since you already had the
well, 6 years ago, I was there. I mean, I lived a couple of blocks from where Eric Garner died, and it was just life-changing because this was a street that I knew, and the way that the entire thing played out, it just hit me on a human level, in the way that I think it's hitting people again right now. And I got involved. I was a part of the marches. Again, like I was mentioning, Tompkinsville Park, which I create programs for over the years, is right across the street from where he died. And part of the commitment to that was because I wanted to see more action and growth and development around the meaning of his death, and the purpose that we all got together and marched at that time. And that's what really carries over to now. I mean, I'm re-energized in the same way. I haven't stopped being energized, but that, talking to Erica Garner, who's now passed, being around the family, being on Staten Island, it's a family. And it felt like someone in our family died. And the way that we rallied together, the way that the country came out for Staten Island, which never happens. I mean, Staten Island, for anyone who's a New Yorker knows that people have no idea what's happening. That wasn't the case. And on a human level, that we knew it was wrong. I mean, the passing of the Eric Garner chokehold act being illegal to do a chokehold, that's long overdue. It was, if you look at that video, it was just despicable. If you look at George Floyd's video, it's just, you do not see this body as a human being. It's very clear. And I can't stand for that. And I want to say that this goes across gender to the Black women, the long list of Black women who are also encountering these situations with the police and who have died. The young woman, the 17-year-old Darnella Frazier, who videotaped George Floyd's horrific death, the mental state that she's going through. I mean, we are not dealing with the mental health of Black people in this country. That even this is bringing up for all of us. Just continuing to see Black bodies handled in this way, killed in this way, dehumanized. That's what fires me up, both men and women. And being able to stand up for justice in a way that needs to be told to power. It's speaking truth to power. It's and for me, it's not a question. It's a necessity. Because if we don't do that, if we stay silent, we'll become complacent. I think part of what's happening right now is they realize we don't want to be complacent. We're not complacent. We're going to stand up and we're going to tell you the truth, and we're going to tell you what needs to happen. And it's going to move past the march. It's going to go into legislation. It's going to go into voting. It's going to go into action. We're going to put pressure on the people who need to make these decisions today, right now. No justice, no peace. This is where we are. And we're tired. And that's the fire that fires me up. To say, I'm going to continue speaking. Because I'm not about dividing. I'm not about if we can't come together. I'm about, hey, you don't agree with me? Fine, let's meet at the table. Let's talk about our disagreeing. Let's talk about what you like. Let's talk about what I want. Let's see where we can come to the middle. We may not agree at the end of the day, but there's no dispute about the justice and the right of a Black body, man or woman in this country, to have equal rights. There are many men and women who died for the right for us to be even here having this conversation freely. I know I stand on their shoulders. And I don't take that lightly. I know that all of the opportunities that I have are based off of those people who have spent their time, risked their lives, and some even died for the opportunities that we have. So as the part of the next generation, I don't have an option to stay silent, because silence is complacency.
Right, that's powerful. Yep, that's true. We can't stay silent, and it's time for us to speak. I mean, it's way overdue. It's way overdue, and we're expecting action now. Brianna, what about you? What inspired you to become an activist?
So I grew up with and extremely close with my maternal grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
She grew up in the segregated South. So she was born in South Carolina in 1925. So I'm sure you can imagine a little bit about the climate back then and what it was like growing up as a young Black woman in the segregated South. And I grew up hearing stories of her advocacy during the civil rights movement, that her and her siblings going to planning meetings and organizing and meeting and speaking with Dr. King, and the different activists you hear about from that period. I have stories of sitting on my grandmother's bed and her telling me about what those people were like in person. And the March on Washington, you can read about it in a book, and there are certainly different resources to learn more about it, but a firsthand account of it, hearing from my grandmother being a part of it and her siblings and planning for it and things like that, I think it's just kind of an unreal context, and it's history, but it's so profoundly my history. It's in my DNA, it's in my blood. And my grandmother, her own grandmother, was a slave. So it's interesting for me sometimes when people talk about slavery and it was so long ago, but to think that my great great grandmother was a slave, it's really not that far back. It's not that disconnected from where we are today. And certainly we feel it. We see it in our systems, but I think that there's a tendency to say it was so long ago, but it's not. If you can just look back a few generations before you and you see it, then it's closer than we realize. And so for me, I would say that my grandmother and my mother sacrificed a lot for me to be able to have the opportunities that I've had in terms of being able to go to amazing educational institutions, really, truly my entire life, from going to private schools in New York to then going away to Penn and Ivy League university, being able to study abroad, and now being at Georgetown Law. Those were the sacrifices that my mother and her mother and those that came before me took for me to even be able to step foot in these rooms, to have a seat, right, and in these spaces. And so for me, I kind of think about, what does it mean if I'm not using this opportunity they've given me, right? So Reese talked about all of these sacrifices that people made before coming before us, losing their lives and so forth. And so, like she was saying, to sit back knowing that, and to be silent, it's not something that I would be comfortable with. They gave me this voice, they gave me this platform, and they sacrificed so much for me to be able to be here. And so I'm going to use it to the best of my ability. And so there were various experiences I had, such as being at a very wealthy white private school in New York. And I remember with, for example, Trayvon Martin, and when Eric Gardner was killed, the white students asking me to explain. I was the same age. I wasn't a teacher. I was a teenager just like them, but having that onus put on me at such a young age to explain it. And in so many circumstances, sometimes when I've been with my friends and I've experienced a certain type of racism, and when it's a white friend and they cannot relate to that, then in that same situation, they see it, but there's a different background and there's a different context that they're not able to relate to, that I have to explain. And so for me, it's also about using this education to be able to educate others. If I'm educated, then I want to help educate everyone else around me. And I think that that means different things. So it means sometimes it might mean educating my white peers on the experiences that I'm having in the classroom discussions and how those affect me in ways that they might not affect them. But then it's also about giving back to those who may not have had the same educational opportunities that I've had, because I can look at myself and, Georgetown, for example, was built off of slavery. Like, that's a fact. The school has recently opened up to it and started talking a little bit more about that. But to think that my ancestors built that place, but it wasn't built for us. It wasn't ever built for someone who looked like me. And so to be in that space today and to still face racism there, to still face the racial microaggressions, but to be able to think of the history behind it and to use it, and to think of everyone else who looks like me, who isn't able to enter a space like that, or who might be in that space, but they're not there as a student. And what does that mean? Like, what are the spaces that we're allowing everyone into? And what are the barriers and the different levels of access there? So sometimes for me, it's taking my education and what has been given to me. And again, I thank my mother very much for everything that she's done for me to be here. And trying to pass it on. So I've done a lot of mentorship programs. When I was in Philly, I was involved with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I still stay in touch with my mentee to this day. Let's see, when I was home, I worked with children whose parents were immigrants, and oftentimes their parents didn't speak English. And that's another barrier that we have, because there's a disconnect there when you're not able to speak the language and you try and you want to give your child that opportunity, but you might just not be able to because we don't have the same educational opportunities when there's a language barrier. And so going into school sometimes, when I was at Penn, I think I went like sometimes 4 times a week to tutor at schools because they were underfunded. I never had to show up to school and wonder, is there a teacher here today? But I showed up to schools where I was tutoring and sometimes there weren't teachers. So thinking about how can I give that back? How can I give back what was given to me and pass that on? And so I've been trying to do that both with education, by getting involved with politics and meeting political leaders and being on the stage to tell Vice President Biden, this is what I think is wrong with America, and this is what other countries are doing, and this is what I've experienced there. And this is, no country is perfect, but I think if we really take a critical lens, we're able to push it forward, but we have to be willing to make ourselves uncomfortable sometimes and open up that conversation.
Awesome. That's great. All right, so there was something I wanted to do at the beginning, but when I was having the technical difficulties with Facebook Live, I got my notes mixed up and I didn't get to do it, so I got thrown off. So now I want to do it. I want to read out all the names of, or most of the names, I think, I'm not sure if I have all of them, of those people who were racially profiled and were murdered by the police. And we would like to have like a moment of silence afterwards for these people. The first one, Rodney King, Los Angeles, 1991. Malice Green, Detroit, 1992. Abner Luima, NYC, 1997. Amadou Diallo, NYC, 1999. Sean Bell, NYC, 2006. Oscar Grant, Oakland, 2009. Trayvon Martin, Sanford, Florida, 2012. Eric Garner, NYC, 2014. Michael Brown, Ferguson, 2014. Tamir Rice, Cleveland, Ohio, 2014. Laquan McDonald, Chicago, 2014. Walter Scott, North Charleston, South Carolina, 2015. Freddie Gray, Baltimore, 2015. Philando Castile, Falcon Heights, Minnesota, 2016. Antoine Rose Jr., Pittsburgh, 2018. Ahmaud Arbery, Glenn County, Georgia, 2020. Breonna Taylor, Louisville, Kentucky, 2020. And George Floyd, Minneapolis, 2020. Okay, thank you. All right, so we now have this issue of racial profiling, which feels more like, to me, like racism wrapped in a blanket. Like, how serious is racial profiling in America? How serious would you say it is? And how do we begin to dismantle it? You want to go, Cherise?
I mean, we're doing it right now. I think the work is happening right now. It's a combination of people on different fronts: social media, spreading the word, it's legislation, it's getting people out to vote. It's making sure that we educate ourselves about the past, present, before we start to shape a future. But even if you haven't educated yourself, join on with people who have to continue moving forward. Don't let that deter you from learning what you need to know in order to be a part of the movement, understand the bodies who have done the work, or the conversations that are having in the rooms that you're not in. And that goes for both Black and white. We have to change the mindset. In order to change a mindset, you have to be educated. You have to come to terms with your own uncomfortability. You have to have uncomfortable conversations. You have to come across spaces that you haven't been in before. I think that's why it's important that disrupting the status quo is important, not looting, not rioting, but peacefully protesting. I think that's an important key to America. We have the freedom of speech. Use that. I say to my white friends and allies, do the work. Don't rely on your Black friends and your Black family members potentially to answer your questions about white fragility and the white gaze. There are so many resources out there. There's so many resources, and we have the internet now. I say utilize that. Joining a march for my white friends and allies. March alongside your Black friends, but don't let it end there. For Black people, understand that you are continuing a lineage of marching, of change, of people who have spent years and decades of work to get us to where we are, and we are part of moving it forward. Figure out where you can sit in that conversation and be instrumental. No action is too small, but if you know you can do more, do more. Racial profiling is a part of a racist America. We are living in a racist America. We are trying to change that. Leadership happens when people take charge, but it's also handed off at different times. So don't be afraid to take something up and ask a friend. Don't be afraid to take care of yourself. Part of this process is self-care, and self-care is important. Knowing that you need to take care of your own body and your own self before you take care of others. It's like the airplane thing. Like, you gotta put the mask on the other person before you put the mask on yourself before you put on the other person. And that's important. I think in the Black community, it's not talked about enough, mental health. I will keep reiterating that, because while we fight, we still must take care of ourselves and check in on our brothers and sisters as well.
That is true. Thank you, Reese. Well, America watched as George was murdered in the most gruesome and heartless manner. What should we expect from the justice system? And how can police officers be held accountable for actions such as this one? Brianna, do you want to take that?
Well, that's a heavy question. Not sure my 1 year of law school can really do it justice. You know, in many ways, I think, especially having just finished 1 year of law school, and this past semester I took criminal procedure. And I think in many ways I was very jaded by the justice system, and I'm not really sure if we really can call it that, if we want to call it that, if we think about how disproportionately it affects and seems to target Black people and people of color in so many ways, negatively, in so many negative ways. So to your question, I'm not fully, I think that in a lot of past cases, a lot of similar cases that we've seen, you see almost like a qualified immunity for police officers who do things like that. So I was watching the news today, and I think that there was one of the rookies who, it was his 4th day on the job. He was actually released today. In my personal opinion, I think he's complicit too. I don't think the excuse that it was only his fourth day or his fourth shift is acceptable, because I didn't go through police training, but if I were in that situation watching, I could have told you that for someone to have their knee on someone's neck for almost 9 minutes, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. And you think about how long 9 minutes is. That's a very long time to have your knee on someone's neck, even for a few seconds.
Like a minute is long.
Right, exactly. And so I don't really know what to say in terms of what can we expect, because of the fact that he was already released, it speaks a lot to the justice system in this country. And it's not a justice system, it is an unjust racist system. But I think what we're doing is trying to advocate for change. I think that the protests in many ways show a very fed up country, and not only a fed up country, but this is happening all over the world. There are protests in unison all over the world. And while to a certain degree they are coming from solidarity, having been to 5 different continents, I can confidently say that racism, colorism, and a lot of these issues, they exist in all of those countries too. So it's not only about solidarity and changing America, but in changing a lot of those countries. So like the European countries that went around trying to colonize half of the world, that still have stakes in their former colonies. So for example, having studied abroad in France, a lot of people don't know this, but France, most of their former colonies in Africa, their economies are still tied to the French economy, and they actually pay a tax to France, and they individually don't even know how much they paid to France. Or the fact that Haiti, the amount of money that Haiti had to pay for independence, that there's a debate on whether France will pay it back, but we really don't know. So I think it's demanding justice not only in the US, but demanding it globally, demanding equal treatment globally, and asking for consistency. My hope is that the global outrage here will show both that we are demanding change, but also that if things continue where police officers who feel so entitled that they can put their knee on a Black man's neck and kill him, and 3 others can stand by and do nothing, that if our legal system allows that to happen, then that shows that there's something wrong with the legal system. There's something wrong with this system that we're calling a justice system. And so if the system we have now doesn't allow for, these people to be properly convicted, then we need to change the system. And we need to make sure that we have a system that's valuing Black bodies, and that's consistently making sure that it's not okay to treat people, right? Because we're people, and that's what I think a lot of people are forgetting.
Almost, yeah. All right. Brian Wilson, founder of the Wilson Academy, he said, "We must be specific if we are to hold our nation accountable." He added that we should demand 3 things: convictions and equitable and appropriate prison time for all officers involved in the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and all parties involved in the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery. We should demand legislation that ensures independent review of public safety officers, and we should demand a modification to the standards by which officers can be prosecuted. Do you think that sums it up?
I think that's a great start. I think defunding the police, which is a conversation that's happening right now, is fantastic. We're talking about education earlier, both Brianna and I, and the way that it really disadvantages our community. And I think putting money back into the community to help create more programs that are going to create more bridges, letting the cops, community affairs get to know the kids better, getting more programs that uplift children to understand who they are and how they move through the world, utilizing those funds in ways that heal communities, so that we're not talking about policing more, we're talking about uplifting more. And while that funding is going towards that, we're dealing with the things that you just mentioned to make sure that NYPD officers, I'm speaking for New York, but yeah, police officers across the country are held accountable, because we need to be protected. We need a police force, but we need one that's going to protect and serve us, not protect and serve them. And that kind of funding, moving that funding is an important step, because what it says is you are here to protect and serve us. That funding is going to the community and you protect the people in that community. So I think that's a fantastic first step, but we have to really uplift our communities. We talked about racial redlining before. That's a real thing. That's communities ostracized, communities that don't get enough attention. It creates problems that then they solve with over policing, which creates a lot. We can't deal with that in the same way. We have to redistribute the funding. We have to make sure that our schools are properly preparing our Black kids for the world. And that, in conjunction with our family members and our friends, you know, takes a village, but it also takes money to keep a village going. And that's what I'm saying, putting that money right into the village, making sure that we have the support and programming, making sure our schools are properly situated, making sure Black-owned businesses are properly supported. That's what we need. And it's about working together. It's not about us saying, okay, well, we're moving your money from your community into the Black community. No, it's saying make it equitable and make sure that policing is equitable across the board, because for sure, there are certain neighborhoods that aren't getting as much police as the Black neighborhoods are. So you're taking money from one community and putting it into another and putting more police into another. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't weigh.
There's a balance. And as you mentioned, the schools, I've learned that you know, most of, especially in New York, it goes by zip codes. So the rich zip codes, they get more money. As far as my research goes, I found out that the rich schools in the rich zip codes, they get $36,000, while the poor schools in the poor zip codes, they get only $13,000. That's like, you know, there's nothing close to equality there, even though they like to talk about equal opportunity. You mentioned earlier in your comments, you mentioned defunding the police. There are some people who really don't understand what it means to defund the police. Maybe you can shed some light on that.
It's basically, like I said, just redistributing the funds to other programs. I think it's just basically that, just redistributing some funds that, particularly right now, that particularly NYPD, I'm gonna speak for NYPD, has, and utilizing some of those funds to go into other areas that better serve the community. So it's just redistributing funds. I think it's hard to really, I mean,
Fortune magazine reported that US cities and states spend an estimated $100 billion on their police forces annually, and an additional $80 billion on incarceration, and that policing typically accounts for 1/3 to 60% of American cities' annual budgets. That's an exorbitant amount of money. So if even 1/3 of that is distributed to, you know, other areas, especially low-income communities, poorer communities, poorer zip codes, to help the children who are our future, to have equal opportunity like the other zip codes, that would make a big difference. And it would be a start, actually, but we need a lot more than that. Let's talk about the BLM movement. Is Black Lives Matter only about the police, or is there more to it? Brianna, would you like to go?
Sure. I think it's more to it. So in addition to the fundraiser that I've been doing, I've also been working with my high school and getting our high school to admit to some of the institutionalized racism that exists there. And so it's interesting just to think about, there's so many layers to it, because there's the lack of funding, mostly in communities of color, Black neighborhoods, in terms of public education. But then there are the mindsets that you have, not only sometimes when you have white teachers in those communities, but also the experiences that you have as a Black student at a wealthier white school. So for example, a friend of mine recently started doing a project where she started asking alumni to share their experiences at our high school. And so many of us had the very same experience. She wrote a post talking about going into college guidance and wanting to apply to certain like Ivy League and other top 20 ranked universities in the States, and college guidance telling her no and telling her she should apply to schools that were not ranked as high, or that those were not the schools for her to apply to. And her mother saying to her, saying to college guidance, she's applying to these schools. My daughter worked hard. And so she'll apply to whatever schools that she wants, and we'll figure out from there. And I read that story to my mom when she got home from work that night. And I said, Mommy, what does that sound like to you? And automatically she thought that I was talking about our own experience, because that was the exact same experience that I had had. And it turns out that there were, that same night, 5 other Black students said they had that same exact experience of being discouraged from applying to those schools. So I think Black Lives Matter, it goes beyond just the police brutality aspect of it. And obviously that is a very important fundamental aspect. And I wouldn't want to detract from that in any way. But I think that Black Lives Matter is touching on all aspects of society. And I think that's because racism and anti-Black racism in particular touches on all aspects, whether it's in terms of housing and zoning and different property laws that make Black people one of the lowest groups for home ownership rates. That's an issue there. And so I think in general, we're saying that Black lives and Black livelihoods matter, and an equal opportunity to access whatever it is, whether it's home ownership or it's education, or if it's going to the store or walking down your block with wearing a hoodie with a bag of Skittles, whatever it is, right? Because it's also the vigilante laws that allowed for George Zimmerman to kill Trayvon Martin. And it's the vigilante laws that allowed these men to stop and kill Ahmaud Arbery. So it's, for me, and I think for many others, it's just that Black lives and Black livelihoods, whatever form they may be, whoever the person is, right? They deserve a chance at life, and their life is important.
I definitely, I want to just say, I totally agree with that. And I want to add on, personally for me, Black Lives Matter is about Black women right now. I feel the need to lift that up, because I feel like Black women often are the last to get heard. And so as I look at the 3 of us in here now, I'm so glad that we're here, because when you look at the list of women who have died at the hands of the police, it's not spoken about. When you look at Black women, how much we've helped to build this country, what our bodies have gone through, how we're objectified, it's not talked about enough. I mean, just to switch a little bit over to the Me Too movement started by a Black woman, that gets lost in the Me Too conversation. Black women are not just the voices of humanity. I'm going to say it. We are the voices of humanity. It's going all the way back to Africa, going all the way back to the first Lucy body, which was the first human being on this earth, a Black woman at the origin of our species. I feel the need to raise up that I want to say to Black men, white people, stop silencing Black women. Black Lives Matter is about all Black lives that have been lost, that have suffered in this country and abroad. But I want to reiterate right now that Black women matter just as much as Black men, and Black lives matter.
Great point.
Period.
Thank you, Reese. Great point. I want to ask, I think I saw, Brianna, you talked about on your Facebook page, you talked about white people, your white friends, or maybe just acquaintances who will come to you or send you an email saying they're sorry for what happened to you. What do we want to say to those people, and to white people who say they are not racist? They're not racist, but they really don't do anything. They just sit back and say, I'm not racist, but they don't join the protest. They don't speak out. It's like they're scared. What would you say to them?
I think there's a need to think critically. And I would say that for all of us, not only for white people, but for Black people too. We all really need to think critically and think of what our roles are. And I say this for going to Black people as well, because believe it or not, I had a lot of pushback on having a fundraiser for Black Lives Matter. And I received that pushback from Black women. And so it's interesting for me listening to what Reese just said, because I wholeheartedly agree with her. And yesterday I had a conversation with other Black women where I was demeaned and belittled by them. So I think that, so I say this to include our Black community as well, because we need to think of how we're treating each other sometimes. I think that's a part of it too, because I can tell you I felt very hurt trying to make a difference, and then being spoken to like a child and having none of the work and none of the accomplishments I achieved acknowledged in that conversation. But to white people specifically, I think that there's a unique role that they have in terms of anti-Black racism. So I'll give you one anecdote from class, and this is something that was poignant for me. I was in my criminal justice class, probably in April or so, and my professor posed the question on whether being stopped by police, like stopped in your car, was equivalent to being held in police custody. And overwhelmingly, white men started responding first. And they all said, oh no, because if you're just stopped, you can leave anytime. It's not like being in custody, because in custody you have to stay, but if you're just stopped, you can go whenever you feel like it. And I just felt so riled up that they were saying it, because what white privilege it is to think that you can just stop and leave whenever you want. Because I was thinking of all of the Black lives before who, you know, we've seen cases of people reaching who were told, show me your driver's license or show me your registration. And the answer is, I thought they were reaching for a gun and things like that. So for a lot of Black people, we're not thinking we can just leave, but there's a very real fear for our lives. And I mentioned that in class. And I was shut down. I was told that they were not going to focus on these rare instances. Overwhelmingly, the answer is that people can just leave. And so there was this total, just basically ignoring the experience that a lot of us have, and what I think a lot of Black parents teach their children in terms of their interaction with the cops. And I was so frustrated speaking up and sharing this and having it shut down. And I was ready to go back at it again and explain this is not a one-off situation, and to name names and examples, and there are very many of them, when a white classmate spoke up and she said that this was white privilege and that they all needed to take a step back and think about their role in that one, they had the privilege not even to think about losing their lives or what could happen to them when interacting with police officers, but in the fact that as a group of white people, and mostly white men, they had just silenced me as a Black woman and everything that that meant. And so I think that, and that I should say, that ended the conversation right there. That was it. And that was something that I had already spoken up and I had been ignored. And so if I said anything again, I probably still would have been ignored. But hearing it coming from one of their peers, that changed things. And so I think that for the white people who say, you know, they say that I'm sorry. And I say, well, what are you doing about it? And for the ones who say, I'm not racist, well, then I say, still, what are you doing about it? And I'm sure you know someone who is, and I'm sure you've been in rooms and conversations where certain things have been said. And so what do you do? And what do you do when maybe no one's looking and the light isn't on you and you don't have any Black friends in the room to check you, but maybe you're at home with your uncle or your father and someone says something and you think about your Black friends and the experiences that I have shared and things like that. And it's, what are you doing in those situations? And how are you using your resources? How are you using, leveraging your privilege to show that you're not racist? Because I think just saying it to me, that's great, but that's not fixing systematic racism. So what are you actually doing about it?
Yeah, that's true. So do you think there is more support for BLM now? Is there more dialogue or understanding from the other side? Would you like to take that, Reese?
Yeah, I think I saw it on the street 6 years ago. I think that there were white people present, and across the board, it was different races for sure present. But what we're seeing now is
Mm-hmm.
is much more involvement. It's not just on the street. It's what can I do? It's institutions releasing action, both in the arts and various different industries. It's actually saying, okay, I'm working to change, which I think is different than I would say 6 years ago. 6 years ago, I'm here with you. And now we're getting, I'm here with you, but I'm also doing some work to dismantle my own institution. I'm hiring this person. I'm actually contributing to the conversation beyond just an appearance. And I think that kind of dialogue and that kind of action is meant to change a systemic uh, system that has been built to continue to keep us oppressed and low. So I think I'm very encouraged. I feel really hopeful. We're in a double pandemic, literally. But in some way, there's some hope. But it can't end with the marches. It has to continue at the polls. We need to make sure these polls are working, y'all, for real, because what happened in Atlanta is a mess, and we need to be looking to make sure that that doesn't happen in November, because that would be a very inconvenient problem for those who want to see change. And so we can vote, we can put pressure on our politicians, we can continue to gather, we can, again, I mentioned a lot of different ways that people can educate themselves so they're not putting pressure on their Black family members and friends. But we are in a good place, I think, a hopeful place. A place to move forward and a place for change. So I feel very encouraged by that.
Yep, I would agree with that. I think that the context that we're all living in right now of having this pandemic, and I think like I was watching the news and watching all these press conferences every single day about a health crisis, and watching that it was disproportionately affecting Black people, that not only were we dying from it more, but then the economic effects we were feeling more, because either we were more likely to have been laid off or more likely to be essential workers, or speaking from being in New York, more likely to have to take the subway and not have any other option for transportation and things like that. And so I think going from that context where you're watching on the news, you have a health crisis that is disproportionately killing Black people. But then in a span of a few weeks in the media, you see this video of Ahmaud Arbery out jogging with someone driving behind in a car filming him, which if you think about it, it really just doesn't make sense. If you really think about it, you have to sit back and think there's way more to this story, and what else am I not being told? But you watch that and then you see these people just jump out of a van and kill him. And then you hear a few weeks later about Breonna Taylor sleeping right in her home. Yeah. And there are knock and announce laws, and those were broken. And so she's killed at 26 years old in her own home. And then you see this video of George Floyd, and you see the entire video, the entire 8+ minutes, almost 9 minutes, this man's knee on his neck, and you see a crowd of people watching it, and you see other police officers just standing by, basically contributing to it. And I think that when you think of all of this together, you have to, and you sit back and think about it, it's obvious that there's a problem, and it's obvious that the problem goes far beyond police brutality. It's obvious that it's a problem in all of our systems, because we've seen it from healthcare to police brutality, and the economic effects and all of the different impacts of that. And I think that right now you have a lot of people speaking up too. I've noticed a lot of people in the sports world, which have been speaking up, but it's been ignored, but speaking even louder now, and it's giving a different context to what they were saying before. And you have white teammates, Drew Brees, for example, who is playing alongside Black men and still couldn't understand why they were peacefully kneeling and saying that their lives mattered. And so you see there that even in these Black and white friendships and these interracial relationships, sometimes there's a gap in understanding. And then we've seen in like Hollywood, different actresses speaking up and talking about their experiences, talking about in education. And I think that part of what's contributing to so many people speaking up right now is that it's so evident that it's in all of our systems. And I think it's at a point where, I mean, I guess you can deny it. I know there are people who are, but if you're really paying attention to it, it becomes harder and harder to admit that it really is a problem.
Based on the protests that are going on now and the obvious and significant increase in our allies speaking out, are you hopeful that we'll see a shift across police departments in the way they react to Black people?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm somebody who's been working with the police. The program I mentioned, I created a Cops and Kids chess tournament with Island Voice on Staten Island for the last 5 years, working with all 4 precincts to create that meeting that I was talking about earlier of cops meeting kids. I've also done the NYPD Citizens Police Academy, which is a free program open to the community. You basically learn exactly what the police does for, I think about a month. You go to these meetings, and each week is based off of a specific category that they learn, and they walk you through it. You get to do an assimilated program where you see someone walking by and you get to figure out if you think they have a gun or not. And you have a split second to make that decision, and they give you the gun and the spray and everything, and you have to choose what you use. You know, that's a nod to implicit bias, which is a part of the training for NYPD. I'm very hopeful. I know I sat with Chief Corey, the Staten Island Borough Commander, and they're doing a lot of work at the NYPD. You know, more than half of the NYPD are people of color. I think the predominant ethnicity, I think, is Dominican right now. They've done a lot of work to rework their police department. And I think it's worth acknowledging there's just more work to do. We can't just continue to sit and say, well, that's great, because clearly we have problems. And I think they're willing to come to the table. And I've seen that time and time again, that they've been willing to come to the table. I think that is progress. I think, but what we're doing and pushing them further is where we need to be, because there's a system that they're a part of. And we have to go after that system and the way that system functions. There are good cops and there are bad cops. We understand that. We're talking about the bad cops. We're putting pressure on that. But we can't put pressure on bad cops without dealing with the system that they come from. So I think we continue to meet them. We continue to push. We continue to make sure that there are laws in place that hold them accountable. We continue to make sure that we're writing to our elected officials. So we're making sure that we, again, say what you want. We have power. We are the people. They're here to protect and serve us. So I don't look at them as the enemy. I'm very weary to look at people as enemies, because we all live in this world and we have to find a way to work together. I think there's a lot more opportunity in that approach than saying, I don't deal with this. And so from an NYPD perspective, from a racial perspective, and anything that's creating a divide in our country currently, I say, let's remove that line. Let's get rid of it. Now let's sit at the table and what can we talk about? And that's where it's going to come from, the innovative ways that we can work together. What do you have to bring? What do you have? And that's how we redefine America. We have to get down to removing that divide. It's been there too long. And we just keep walking around like it's not there. And specifically with the police departments across this country, there is a deep history that of racial, of racism that goes back to the Klan in some states. And so when I'm talking about New York, but we go down south, go down to some of these states, we have to say it. We have to know. We know that you're in there, okay? And so we have to identify those guys and get them out. If you know that that guy in the locker room is saying some stuff, did some stuff today, you gotta report him. You can't just keep the bro code or whatever that code is called close to you and not think about the person on the street that's going to be killed today, tomorrow, the next month because of that person. We need to make sure that the people within the police department feel free enough to speak up about those kinds of police officers in the locker room. That's the type of system that we have to dismantle. But again, I feel hopeful. It's not that I'm not saying anything new. People know some of this stuff. It's just, you know, if you look up the history of the police department, I mean, there's some serious stuff in there. But we're here. And I have hope because they're coming to the table. And we have to continue to make sure we sit at the table with these people because they're the ones that are going to protect and serve us. And until we make sure that we say that we are people who deserve and we have the right to be protected and served, they're going to continue to police the way that they see fit. And that's just not good enough.
True. And that program you just spoke about, that sounds like a great initiative. It would be nice if you know, similar programs could be implemented in police departments across the country, even though I know there are certain states who would not welcome that. But if we make a start, you know, somewhere, that would be great. Yeah. We've run out of time. So I just want to ask one last question. What does it mean for us to say, I can't breathe? What message are we sending? You want to go, Brianna?
Sure. I think when you're saying I can't breathe, it goes beyond the literal sense, right, of having the breath taken from you. But I think it's the deprivation of your basic humanity, of all of the rights that we talk about when we talk about everything that America was founded off of, and the right to life and liberty and freedom. And it's the deprivation of all of that. It's the deprivation of respect. You're taking away the life and not recognizing the humanity of a person. And I think that right now it's something that we can equate with racism. And it's nothing new because we've seen it with Eric Gardner. That wasn't even a decade ago. But I think that right now it's really driving in what that means. And I think also in the context of a pandemic, when you had a virus, a respiratory virus, and what that means when you have something respiratory that's taking away breath in that way. And now you have humans who are actively and intentionally doing that, and racial implications with that as well. And so it's I think it's just a profound, it's bringing history back in so many ways. But I think right now I'm hopeful in a way. I think that we have even more people saying it than before. And I think when you think of the fact that when Eric Gardner died, for example, you had NBA players wearing I Can't Breathe, and now they're reposting this from years ago. And to think about the fact that that's happening again, and thinking about the entire context behind that, and thinking about what does humanity mean, and what do we allow, and what do we expect from people, and how can we treat people. And so I think we're not only equating racism and the deprivation of air and the right to that, but just the basics of freedom and humanity and respect, and saying that that has been taken away from not only Eric Garner, but you look at his family, right, and his daughter, and who died as well. And you look at now George Floyd, who is saying that, and you think of all of the Black lives going back to slavery, the slave trade and the slave ships, and coming here, and lynching and colonization, and everything going on around the world in different countries, and how many people before have said I can't breathe, and what that means, and what are we doing now as a society to continue what was done centuries ago and decades ago, going back to my grandmother and her generation and what they stood for. And I think that now as a collective, more of us are feeling what that means. More of us are standing in unity to say, if one person can't breathe, then we all can't.
True.
I think
Yeah.
I think I Can't Breathe is for all of the voices that never had the platform to tell their story. I think about the slaves who died. I think about the bodies who encounter racism every day. I think about the list of names that we paused for. I think about the men and women who had to die at the hands of the police. I think about the children who are coming across racism for the first time in school, who are questioning their skin color. I think about the inability to articulate racism because you don't know what it is yet, and learning that. I think about us needing to have this conversation again 6 years later, decades later, centuries later. I Can't Breathe represents Black people who are stressed, tired, who didn't have a platform to speak, who died. But it also represents the people who can. Because if I can say I can't breathe, that means I have breath to speak. And if I have a breath to speak, then I can do something with my voice. And that's how I look at it in two ways. I Can't Breathe is representing those who can't speak and those who died for us to be able to be here to speak. And it also represents those who can and those who are going to take that torch and move it forward. Because breath matters. It serves us, it gives us life. And Black bodies on this earth are going to change the world. We always have, in relationship with other people. But we are beautiful. We are worthy. We are kings and queens. And we can breathe when there's justice. But until there's justice, there's no peace.
That's true. Right. All right. We've come to the end of our program. Is there anything else you would like to add, either of you, to what we've already discussed?
I just want to lift up all the Black queens in this conversation.
Yay.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us and giving us this platform to share
You're
today.
welcome. It was a pleasure having you both. I've learned so much from you, even though I've had to be holding back tears. Honestly, I'm listening to you both and I just want to cry. I've been struggling to hold back the tears. It's a tough time for us, but we have to be hopeful that it will end soon. Thank you both for joining me today on Conversations with Trudy. And I'm just hoping that neither of you will experience any form of racism in the future. Brianna, I know you're still in a position where it may still happen to you. And I just hope that you don't have to go through that again, because I don't think, anybody wants to go through that. Those were some really tough experiences that you've had. So going forward, let's pray that, we get what we're asking for, because we deserve it and it's long overdue.
Action.
Thank you again, and thanks to our viewers on Facebook. See you next week. I'm going to close with a statement. This is not a moment, it's a movement, and the struggle continues tomorrow.
That's right.
And power.
Peace.
Bye, ladies. Thank you so much.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.